Welcome to our Chapter 13 on administration and scoring and interpretation of selected tests. Now, we've some years we've already done some tests here, and some years we haven't. So I will refer to what we've done this year, which is we just had a lab in the last class period here, and hopefully we're going to keep continuing to do that as we move along. All right, so we're going to start with ways of measuring athletic performance. So we're going to start with muscular strength. So this would be low speed strength. So this is usually the maximum effort kind of tests that you would do here. Your 1 rep max. You do a 1 rep back squat, a 3 rep max squat. You do an isokinetic dynamometer, which would be really cool, or an isometric mid-thigh force pull. That one's pretty cool. You would actually put the force plate on the ground, and then you would make the bar kind of on a squat rack. And you would put your hands underneath it, and then you would leave it where it's at, and you'd pull up, which would force your feet to go down, and you get how much force you could push against that. So I'd really love to get some force plates here. So maybe someday that's going to happen. But that's a pretty cool one. An isokinetic dynamometer, now that would be more of a lab setting or a physical therapy setting, is where you would see something like that, where they would actually like hold your knee in a specific angle, and then you would try to push against that direct one. So you do an exact, like an elbow joint or a knee joint, that kind of thing. It's really hard to know. So think most on the bench press is best to do a 3 or 5 rep max is what I have on here. Being properly spotted with trained professionals is the safest way to do that. It's hard to know what will make an athlete fail on a 4th attempt. So whenever you do, you're going to try to do as in the first few that you can. So an anaerobic or maximum power kind of setting. So this would be a high force, high speed. So their last one was low speed, high force. So this one's high force, high speed. So this would be something jumping as high as you can. A static vertical jump, a counter move with your arms back and forward, or a static one would be with your hands on your hips, jumping straight up. A broad jump, we'll show that in a little while. The Magnum Calma stair test. Probably it would be fun to try that one in a school setting here for a lab, but I have not heard of any teams actually using it as a skills test, because that's really running how fast can you get from step 3 to step 9. So fun test to do, but not one that's going to be easily done and repeatable with a group of 20 to 40 athletes, depending on your soccer or basketball kind of team. Overhead shot put throw, 1 rep max, power clings. Those are all be good examples of that. I need to keep going here. There's a lot of slides. So most maximal muscular strength tests use relatively slow movement speeds and therefore reflect low speed strength. Assessment of these high speed muscular strength can involve measuring a 1 rep max for explosive resistance or the height of a vertical jump. So high speed strength, probably want to use both to get a nice spectrum of your athletes. So for an aerobic capacity, you're going to want to use something like a 400-meter sprint. So this is where you're trying to get to that combined energies of your phosphagen and your aerobic glycogen energy are parts that you're going to want to use there. And then a local muscular endurance, those would be your YMCA, your max sit-ups, max push-ups. Physical education class kind of test is what you do here. The team sports don't usually use long muscular endurance tests or individual ones or these local ones. One that might be interesting would be like for an Olympic rower would need something for a biceps one. So doing a bicep curl strength test, that would be a muscular endurance. That might be one that's useful. But generally speaking, muscular endurance is probably not going to be something you want to do if you're an athletic trainer for your or a varsity levels team. Now, for a school, for grade school through high school, seeing how much they're improving and comparing them to norms, it's probably a useful tool. So aerobic capacity, so you want the maximum rate of an athlete going through all their oxidation energy sources. So this is where you're trying to probably do a VO2 max of some sort. So VO2 max test on the machine, which we have, a 1.5 mile run or a 1 mile run, or maybe a yo-yo test. Yo-yos where you go back and forth, back and forth. Great one for soccer, great one for basketball, or even like a tennis athlete where they're sprint for 3 seconds, sprint for 3 seconds. So an agility test So the key word on this agility test that I want to say, so it's the ability to change direction or speed in a sport-specific response. So like a tennis player is going to have to go side to side to side to side. You're probably not going to do a 1.5 mile test on a tennis player or even a volleyball player. They're not doing long distance things. So a quick change of direction. But an agility test needs to have some sort of change of speed or a cognitive concept or component to that. So at the T test we did the other day, we ran and people asked me, which way should we go first? Should we go to the left or to the right? And I'm like, well, for max speed, you're probably going to want to push off your dominant leg first. Well, but if you're trying to that would be if you're just doing this as a change of direction drill. If you're actually doing a full agility, there needs to be some sort of cognitive thing. So you're actually having to read what direction. So maybe at the end of the T test, have a coach stand there that's pointing as they're getting close to their one direction or point the other. So you're looking at to have a sort of change of direction thing in there. So they have a cognitive component. So for speed, your movement distance per time is usually qualified there. This one never makes sense to me. So all these would be like 10-meter sprint, 20 minutes. 40-yard dash. What's the difference between a sprint and a dash? I think it's terminology. Older folks like to call it one. Younger ones think it sounds better. Doesn't really matter. It's a fast run, as quick as you can. A max effort run. So flexibility, this would be a range of motion. So your overhead squat, we'll talk more about those later. Balance. So we'll talk about these more later, but you want to have the ability to maintain a static equilibrium and stability. Where you'll use this as a trainer would be in a concussion protocol. You want to see, do they still have the balance? And you would do that right after the concussion, and then a week later is what should be done. At least that's what California gives us. Well, at least when my basketball players have to go see the doctor right after, because the sooner you can get into concussion protocol, the sooner you can get out of it. And one of the tests they will do on that is a balance test of some sort. They will do a balance test when they go in football and put that hood thing over in the tent. That's one of the things that they're doing in those concussion protocols. So body composition, those are other ones that you can measure. Anthropody, man, those are so cool. I just don't have the measurement tools for it. If you're at home, let's take a standing break. All right, let's roll. So when you're testing your athletes, you want to make sure you're going to make it as reliable as possible. One of the things we did on the T test the other day is we wanted to have two people timing and take the average of the two. Rather than trusting on one person, because when somebody starts and stops could be slightly different. So taking the average of that, and really might even be better to have three people and average the three to get the best or the most reliable testing numbers there. So to maximize the reliability, you also want to have all of your temperature, humidity, surface, time of day all need to be a part of it. I make sure I would love to be able to do our 1.5 mile runs on a treadmill in the gym here in our cardio room, because it's going to be more consistent than it would be outside where you're going to have other conditions. So if I'm going to try to take a pre-season, post-season kind of exam or test or fitness test, that's what I would want to do. You should probably not do it right after practice. This should be a before practice kind of thing. Make sure they're well hydrated and don't have any extra supplements in them. So caffeine would be something, creatine, things that we talked about there. And for what order to do it, refer back to the lecture before in chapter 12. All right, so some procedures here. When you're doing a 1 rep max, and any of these kind of tests really, you want to have the same kind of procedures every time you give it. You want to give the same speech to them. So a 1 rep max is the most you can lift in one shot. A repetition max. So the second one here, that was where you would do a 3 rep max or a 5 rep max. If I get the privilege of teaching an advanced weight training class where I would probably have a lot of the athletes in, I would definitely be using a 3 rep max or a 5 rep max as our measurement tool rather than a 1 rep max like I use in my beginning weight training class. It's just easier for them to understand rather than trying to put it into a chart and figure out what to do with. Keys on this, make sure your spotters don't touch the bar and not on one side then the other. So like if you have 2 spotters, one on each side, it's really bad if someone's struggling and one side goes up and then the other side drops. That would be bad. So Sometimes you got to be careful when they're doing like a 1 rep max squat if they don't go all the way down. Whew, I need to go faster here. And then here's the load on what that would be if you had, here's your 1 rep max. You need to have things in your head to know that like your 4 rep max will be 90% of your 1 rep. 75% is going to be 10 reps. 80% is 8 reps. So if somebody can say, here's my 1 rep max, you can then, 80% of that weight is what they should be able to do for a hypertrophy 8 to 12 rep position, or 8 to 12 there. We'll go into way more detail into the technique of the bench press later. So chapter 15 and methods of this. But coaches should aim to find that 1 rep within the first 3 to 5 attempts. So you need to be as close as you can get to start. All right, so a couple of fitness tests that you can do. So one would be the bench pull. I've not actually tried this one. I've not seen it done. Maybe I should try this for my at my beginning weight training class. But the setup's a little complicated because you need to put the bench up on a thing here. And I always seem to have really long arm basketball players in my class. So that would be a tough one, to pull up. So down, up. So for a back squat, this is one that's probably done more often. Again, we're going to have more methods and descriptions later. Again, first 3 to 5 reps. So some that are probably easier to do would be like a standing long jump. There are, so many schools I've gone to have had a standing long jump mat that sits in the PE teacher's office or ballroom. One place I was at had a folding gymnastics mat, like the old flop, 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 flop ones. That had writing on it that they had either painted on or taped on. So they start here, they jump, you measure where, and they have to stand up afterwards. So it's not like a falling one. So distance is measured from the rearmost heel. Make sure you have a warm up with them before they do this one. Don't just have them come in cold. The wall jump is, again, this is one you can do in almost every gym. So teacher rubs chalk on the hand of the athlete and has them jump. An easier way, I think, is Post-it notes for this. So have the student take the Post-it note and give them a couple minimum effort to try to get the touch with their counter movement swings with their arms here. So it's not the greatest, but it can be done anywhere. Chalk might not work. It might smear. We tried this in the hallway there, and they used a marker. And we thought we put up a thing high enough. But the group that did it, one of the guys actually jumped above the mark, and now there's a mark at about the 10-foot mark in that hallway over there. Don't tell the athletic director. Shh. You could use a vertex device here, but there is a set of ways of doing that to set it up. We'll go over those another day. That's why it's in yellow, so it tells me we're going to do this later. So a static vertical jump, so that's without the arm swing. So you notice in these pictures here, you have your arm swing back and then up as high as you can go. And in this case, you start squatting down with your hands on your waist, and then you jump from there. It's a little bit bigger, so it looks lots of cool information, but probably predicting a different value when it comes to no arm swing. You're not going to really be able to tell somebody if they can dunk or not because of that. Would be interesting to see how far above the rim do you need to be able to reach in order to be able to dunk a basketball. That'd be an interesting research one for those in research class. So a relative strength index, and we will do this in biomechanics class, or we may have already if you've taken that class already, is where you're going to have several different things that go with it. So in this case, they're using a drop jump here. So you start on the box, you drop off, you contact the mat, and then you jump as high as you can. And we use an app to do this. It's called My Jump Lab, and it works on our iPads or on phones. And that makes it so we can measure. It really is good when you don't have force plates. It's the best option that I've found. There's a little bigger video of it. This is actually onto a force plate is what it looks like he's got here, to a cell phone. So when he jumps, you can actually measure how much force is coming off of there. That would be super cool. I saw this one and I looked into it a little more, and I like the fact that it gives you a formula to figure out how much power in watts someone uses. So sometime when we're talking about watts in one of my classes, I think I want to use this one. So you sprint 6 meters or 20 feet. And if you have it done right, it's when the third step and then the ninth step. So you're going to skip 1, 2, 3. It would be best if you had a switch mat to do this digitally. I would probably record this from the side if I could. And I would probably take note in millisecond or in tenths of a second. Actually, this one says to the thousandths if possible. Thousandths of a second and then thousandths of a second video analysis to get your times on this one. Similar to what we did in biomechanics with poles and a 40-yard sprint. Every 10 yards, we got your splits that we use video to do. So that's how I would probably do that. We did this one in lab a couple days ago. So it's a ground layup for a 300-yard shuttle run. You just do to pair them off, 25 yards. You're going to make 6 round trips. And it's best, again, to have multiple people timing it if possible. Most of our students did this in 1:15 to 1:30. So this is getting into that second energy system is what you're testing here, or training even. Good old curl up here. Actually, as I was getting prepared to do this lecture, the academy next door is doing their fitness gram test. So this is part of the California fitness gram. So this one actually says to do it with a 40 beats per minute. I don't know what the cadence is for fitness grams. So like down, up, 1, down, up, 2. The thing I really like about these is putting tape here for you to know how far to slide your hands. I think it's 5 inches so that your finger goes from, and you can just do it by how far you slide your hand up and slide it back. I really like that part of it. This one, there's a couple different ones here. So there's push-ups. There's the Army standard, which is as many as you can do in 2 minutes. And they usually do more of a tricep push-up. So elbows in more is what I see more in the military style. So up on your toes, elbows more in. There is the ASCM standard for females. And that would be I would call it a modified push-up. I hate calling them guy push-ups and girl push-ups. Just has a negative connotation, especially as a physical education teacher. But even as a health professional, if you're working with somebody who's not as in good a shape, having them do a modified position would be easier for them to get started. Or what I'll have my students do as many full push-ups as you can, and then do as many modified push-ups as you can. The YMCA bench press, this would be an endurance test. So it's going to be 80 pounds for males, 35 pounds for females. It's harder to come up with that 35-pound weight. I've actually done it with I have adjustable dumbbells at home, and I have 17 and a half and 17 and a half, and then I would do it that way have my wife do it. Do them with a cadence of 60 beats per minute, up, down, up, down, up, down. One of you guys did that on me when I was the personal trainer person. 1.5 mile run. So this one would be doing it. I love this terminology here, so just steal this. Perform this quickly, as quick as possible at a steady pace that you can barely maintain over that distance. So you want to be exhausted at the end of that 1.5 mile run, and it should be a consistent pace. I've hesitated doing this one in classes. It hasn't worked as well for me. I have done better with a 12-minute run, whether you do it most people like doing it outside, like I've done this with health classes, health ed, or Fit for Life. Or even academy level. 12-minute run is the easiest one to do. And so you can have them measure it out. There's numbers here that are good, but usually you can just put it into a calculator online. The yo-yo intermittent one. I like this test. So a 20-meter course set up with 2 meters apart with 5 meters behind. So at the signal, the athlete runs towards the line. At the second signal, the athlete arrives at the turning line and then comes back. Then they jog toward the 5-meter mark after the start line and then return to the start line to wait for the sound. This test is terminated when they cannot maintain a required pace, and you would have to figure out what that pace is. So here's what that would look like. So they sprint. So start line, turning line. So you start in the cones here. Sprint hard, turn, come back to here, and then jog back for recovery, turn back around, start line, go, back, come through. Much more realistic for like a soccer player or something along those lines. That's what I think. So marker cone, so max aerobic speed test. So marker cones are placed at 20 meters. You have initial speed of the test is 8 to 12 kilometers, depending on the fitness level of the athlete. Then the speed would increase by a kilometer an hour every 2 minutes until they can't go anymore. So you put this on a running track, and you would measure them as they come by at this 20 meter mark to this 20 meter mark. And that's how you would get your speed for 8 to 12 kilometers. Not one I've actually done before, so it's an interesting one. So another one would be at the last speed, maintain speed for 2 minutes. It's considered the speed association to go with their VO2 max. So that's how you say it. It's terminated when the athlete fails to reach the next cone in 2 consecutive occasions. So the speed of this last speed is increased. VO2 max can be calculated by multiplicating 3.5 by the mass. Again, those calculations would be in the back of your book. That's why I tell you to have this book. Keep it. T-test, that's what we did the other day. So you start at A, you sprint forward, left, right, back to C, and then back pedal to here. Hexagon test, we'll do this one later. The athlete double leg hop, so feet together, and you'll hop clockwise around the hexagon. So you'll start here, you'll hop in, out, 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 and back to where you start. This one's not hard to do. It just takes a lot of setup, like taping this thing down at 24-inch increments at exactly 120 degrees just takes forever. I really think that the next time I do this, I have a hexagon mat that I have in my basketball stuff, and I'm going to see if it's how close it is to that size. And then I will actually use either tape or, so I'll say I have tape, so blue tape for any gymnasium, or spray if you're doing it outside on a field. I love these things. It's called floor marks. Gotta make sure that video flips. And you have to get the ones that are water soluble. They have 2 versions of this. One takes rubbing alcohol to get it off, and the other one takes, the red one does not come off very well, I will tell you. The pro agility test, this one I've seen done at some combines before. So foot contact has to be made with all of them. So this one, you start in the middle, you go to the left. I believe this is a turn and run, turn and run, turn and run. I've also seen this done with sliding. Either way, so it depends on what you as the trainer wants to do or you as the professional wants to do. The 505, I have not done this one. The athlete taking the test sprints forward 10 meters. So sprint forward, touch the line, come back another 5. Sprints an additional 5 meters past the timing lights. With 1 foot over the line, turns back to the first set of timing lines and sprints back 5 meters to that timing one. 2 trials are recorded, and you average them to the nearest second there. You could just have athletes do your straight line sprints. Allow at least 2 practice runs. And I say that on almost all these, on your T-test, on your hexagon test, T-test, all of these, you would actually want to make sure everybody gets a slow sub-max run on that test. So then give them a starting position using either a 3 or 4 point stance in this case. So at an auditory signal, have them sprint a specific distance. The best split times are the trials are between the 2. Allow at least 2 minutes of recovery. All right, so there is a balance test here. So this is one of those that you would use at a physical therapy clinic for probably a concussion athlete. That's the one that as an athlete you're going to do that. Or this would be for an elderly that you would use this on to check their are able to stay balanced and assessing fall risk. So feet together, it would be the double stance, single leg stance, and a tandem stance where you're basically heel toe pointed together. Usually this is conducted on a firm surface at first and a soft surface seconds. So you'd have them hold the stance for 20 seconds with their eyes closed. There's the key there, and hands on their hips. Athletes are told to keep as steady as possible. If they lose their balance, they attempt to regain their position. So errors of this would be opening your eyes, lifting hands from their hips, touchdown of the non-foot when you're doing the single leg, step, hop, any movement, lifting the forefoot or heel, so heel or toe coming off the ground, moving the hip more than 30 degrees out, or just remaining out of position for that. So the easiest ways to do this is on firm stuff here. And then there is the soft condition, which, my goodness, these are in every physical therapy clinic, are these soft things. And you'll stand on these things. I definitely did a lot of these for my ankle flex or my ankle recoveries and my knee recovery. All right, so the SCAR test, so you're going to stand in the center of a grid, and there's 8 lines at each 45. They maintain a single leg stance in one direction, and then they move the other leg, collateral leg, as far as possible in each taped line, touching the farthest point. So we don't really need sound for this, but they're going to stand on one leg, and they're going to slide their foot forward. Wow, that is a terrible video. There we go. And then they go to the next angle, to the next angle. The hardest one, man, we try this in class sometimes. If we were doing this video lecture in person, I would actually have you try this. That one's tough, and then the last one, you have to put your leg over the top. I've had people try to go behind the leg there. It ends up being pretty entertaining. All right, so within a single trial, they remain facing the same direction. A way to measure this would be the distance from center on each touch position. And so you could either have them put this on their foot, maybe have some sort of chalk on their toe that they would tap in each place. So 15 seconds of rest are allowed between the two. You know, if they don't touch the line, if they lift their foot, they lose their balance, maintain the start position for 1 second. So a lot like our balance test the other day when we were tapping 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. They got to hold their step. So hopefully they can get several tests on this one before they actually do it. All right, keeping going. There's all the different directions. Good old sit and reach. Not a bad one. We actually have some things to put on there. And so you'll start with your feet on the heel line there. You'll put the yardstick wherever you are. I usually tell people to do this against a wall because then you have a starting position where your hands are. And then lean as far forward as you can. Overhead squat, another one we will do for one of our labs later on. And this one's a great one to see someone's just general mobility. How far can they move? You know, and you'll measure, you can actually biomechanically measure how far this angle is, how far this angle is, how far their shoulders stay up. There'll be skin fold measures is another way. I don't do a ton of this. It's kind of awkward, and I think there's better ways to do it, but it is good to know that it does exist. So it's best to actually mark the location, pinch, pull, and get your measurement there. Some other places here would be in the abdomen, right around the belly button, the back of the tricep, sublunar and midexcula. I haven't done this one very often, especially this one on the hip bone here is just a little awkward, so I haven't done that one very often. Under the arm here, subscapula and calf. So subscapula, I have done that one. Calf one's weird. It's just, there's just not a lot of fat there, so there's not usually a lot of things to grab. So other places so girth would be measuring all the way around. So this one you take a measuring tape around it. There's some great ones that you can just pull it tight and it'll ratchet it into place and then you can read it. Those are really nice. They're fairly inexpensive too. So that's all the spots that you would do that from: forearms, upper arm, chest, waist, hips. Usually the widest place of the hips is what you're looking for, and then thigh and calf. I definitely had these done when I had ankle surgery because you'd spend 6 weeks off of your leg And then like they'd measure how big my calf was on each side to compare them together to see how much muscle loss I had. So other just statistical things that you need to know. You have a central tendency. So that would be the mean, median, or mode. Mean is the average. Add them all together, divide by how many you have. The median, the middlemost score. So it's usually if there's an odd number, there's a middle one. If there's an even number, you take the middle two numbers. And then the mode is the one that happens most often. People got 10 seconds most often on a run or something like that. So just statistical term. So variability is going to be the interval between the lowest and highest scores, the range. Standard deviation, a measure of variability. And then percentile. Man, I hear percentile all the time with my kids. I've got my 3-year-old is in this what percentile for height and weight. And head circumference is something they measure with kids too. So a bell curve, they call this normal distribution. And then they have standard deviations away from that. So people would say, can we grade on the curve? Well, you probably don't want to grade on the curve because that means only 3% of the people are going to get an A. 13% of them are going to get a B. 68% of the class are going to get a C, no matter what your scores were. Like even if the lowest score in the class is a 70. So don't ask to do that. That's not the right question. So inference versus magnitudinal studies. So an inference allows a general conclusion about a population by a population sample. So a population sample must be representative. So making sure you have the same age group, the same sex, the same, sometimes they do socioeconomic status, especially in a lot of our nutritional studies is something that they're going to measure. The magnitudinal statistics allow for a clinical significance. So we'll call that sometimes statistically significance in a fitness testing. A small worthy change is the ability to detect a small practical important change of performance. The amount of size is going to depend on your group. Most of the people in our research class end up having to say, it may or may not be statistically significant because I didn't have enough people to actually do this on. So when developing an athletic profile, select the tests that measure what as close as you can to that sport. So having a basketball player doing a tricep extension might be the most closest thing to measure. So maybe even like we talked about earlier, they have some static joint ones. Hold your arm in place and then it'll statically measure how much force your tricep can do. So choose a reliable test that's measurable and repeatable, and then arrange a battery that is going to work for that group. So compare the normative data of that student or that athlete to whatever they have. Develop your own norms and standardized procedures to use. So if you have a team setting, that would be the best way to do that. Conduct repeated testing before and after a training program. Usually the off-season is the best time to be doing this. And then use the results to present visual profiles of those figures, either comparing them to their teammates or to the norms of as a whole, if you have that. So you're going to identify strengths and weaknesses of your athlete, and then you're going to design a training program with these in mind. And so at the end of our class, you are going to design a training program for a year long for a specific athlete. So that's one of the things you'll have to have or have as a part of it is here are the numbers of this student or this athlete, and here's what they're going to be able to do. All right, that is all I got for today. Probably faster to get through these 90-something slides. A lot of pictures, than I would probably if we had done this in person. So have a fantastic day. There'll be a quiz due tonight.